All right, so here we go. This is the end of March loose ends. Everyone watching here, if some people in the live chat and some people in the Discord could confirm that the sound is reasonable, then we can get started. I always like to get a check from both sides here. Let's see. All righty. Sounds like it is sounding good. And so let's get started. Again, this is the end of month loose ends. I do this somewhere around the last week to after the month ends, a couple weeks into the next month, like looking back at the subjects of the previous month, looking forward, and just answering questions live. And I think that's important to do because I don't need a week to edit what I say or have Gerard edit down a conversation. I'm here. Whatever you want to know, whatever you want to ask, put it in the live chat. If you put a tip, I'll notice your question more quickly. Otherwise, I'll just start rolling through the questions I want to answer and the pre-prepared subjects and questions from patrons who get to submit questions for free. And March has been another big month. I don't know about you guys, but I think I can honestly say that at least so far, 2022 feels at least as news packed, or 2023 feels at least as news packed as 2022. Like definitely more than 2021, and it just seems like there is constant interesting developments in which products sell well, which products are coming out, and also which products are not coming out. But speaking of products coming out, the thing I actually, and I'll put a timestamp here, want to start with is just some final updates to the RTX 4070 launch. So the broken silicon that I owe you guys for this week with Dan going over the news of the past couple weeks, that'll come out probably Thursday. And that's so we can cover the RTX 4070 reviews properly. But that means that this is the last piece of content going out before the RTX 4070 launches. And so, yeah, I want to give you guys some final little whispers that I have heard here. So, first of all, the recent 4070 videos I've put out talked about how shocked AIBs were that they were last minute being told they're going to have to sell, well, let's say a significant portion of their cards below cost. And I am told that Nvidia has now decided to do for some of the initial volume something they basically almost never do, and that is provide a rebate to the AIBs. So what this means is that on some of the cards in the initial 4070 shipments, we'll get a check in the mail from Nvidia to an AIB for selling that card for $600, let's say, instead of $700. Now, what that means, because this is very important to pay attention to, is that when the AIB set out designing their RTX 4070 coolers, some were meant to be budget cards, some were meant to be the typical mid-range builds with like 2, 3 fans, probably a 16 pin. And then, of course, some of those were designed to be like $750 plus mega triple quadruple fan, ridiculous triple quadruple slot cooler cards. NVIDIA is basically, after mandating that half of the cards need to be at MSRP, saying some of these cards in the middle will pay you the difference for the first month. Now, what does that mean though? That means that that's not permanent. That means that AIBs temporarily will be taking some of their mid-range builds and selling them for less than they want to. And then based on initial sales, most likely, they'll just be switching production over to the ultimate budget boards. And some of those boards that were artificially subsidized by NVIDIA will probably go up in price. So what I'm trying to warn you is that on release day for the 4070, if for some reason you decide this is the perfect card for you, and you see like a decent quality 16 pin version for $600 or even like 630 next to a $600 8 pin model, and you're like, why are these the same price? They probably won't be a month from now. A month from now, the AIBs will be going, okay, so it seems like we're supposed to sell these for less. Let's make less of the premium models. And any premium models left will go up in price. There will be more 8 pin models that are super budget built. And so there's an opportunity here to get some artificially lower priced cards, I think. And I guess on top of that, what I would add is remember that I said NVIDIA is mandating half of the initial shipments need to be at MSRP. Half, 50%. So that means that I would not be surprised If you saw a decent amount of cards on launch day that were MSRP, half of those were fairly low quality, and then half of them were $700 or more. We'll have to see where it averages out, but I think there's a very good chance here that what we're going to see is Nvidia watch this half and that half, these $600 models, the more expensive models, and they're going to look very closely at how well they sell. Because if the $600 models sell out instantly, and then the around $700 models sell okay, I think Nvidia is going to go, oh, we overcorrected. We didn't need to charge $600 for this card. AIBs, do whatever you want in the future. We're removing, our rebates from future shipments, and feel free to sell these cards for $700. They're selling out at 600. They'll probably sell out at 650 and 700. Or if the $600 models sell okay, these $700 models don't sell at all, Nvidia is going to go, we probably need to prepare for some price drops for the entire lineup later this summer for back to school, but not drastic price drops. It seems like 650 was probably the price we should have gone with. And then, of course, if the 4070 sells terribly across the board, then I think Nvidia knows they just need to resort to some pretty drastic price drops, and they've really screwed up with Lovelace pricing. But it's going to be up to consumers to telegraph to Nvidia where this is. Is the 4070 really where most of Lovelace should have been? Did Nvidia price most of their Lovelace lineup 10% too expensive, 20% too expensive? Or are they almost nailing it and they just need to make slight adjustments? That's what Nvidia is going to be watching with 4070 sales when they make some decisions about whether to do price drops later on. And I guess the last thing I would leave you with this RTX 4070 update is just remember, the 4070, if you look at the specs, depending on if it's a higher boosting or lower boosting model, and depending on if you're talking about 4K or 1440p, you're probably looking at a card that's let's say 14 to 20% weaker than the 4070 Ti for 25% less money. If you thought $800 for the 4070 Ti was insane, is it really that much better if a 15% weaker card is 25% cheaper? I would argue it's really not, especially in the face of so many games clearly wanting more than 12 gigabytes for 4K and clearly wanting more uh, than 8 gigabytes for 1440p. And um, don't forget that, oh God, what was I going to say? Yeah, right. Don't forget that if you say the 4070 is a 1440p card and so 12 gigabytes is fine, I don't know what happened to PC gamers where they thought $600 shouldn't be able to do 4K. We've been doing 4K fine for years now. To expect a $600 plus card to not do at least okay in 4K without having to turn down some of the settings for 4K 60, if that's what Nvidia has convinced people, they've won. That's all I will say there, because don't forget, the 4070 is a 104 die that is cut down about the same amount that the $400 4060 Ti was. And maybe it's more than 8 gigabytes, but it's also 3 years later or 2.5 years later. So going from 8 to 12 gigabytes when 8 gigabytes had issues, you're really doing the same thing. 12 gigabytes is the new 8 gigabytes. 16 gigabytes is the new 12 gigabytes, and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd like to hope that people still fight for lower prices on graphics cards, because this isn't Nvidia capitulating, guys. It isn't. A 300 millimeter square die cut down by 24% being sold for $600 is not what capitulation looks like. This is Nvidia testing the waters to see if they were only slightly off instead of wildly off, like I feel like consumers have told them they have been up until now. And outside of that, I guess the only other update I would provide about the 4070 is, unfortunately, I don't have as much input on volume as I would think I would by now. I'll probably have a bunch more tomorrow or something. If I do, I'll tweet that out. But what I would say is early whispers and information I'm getting is that the 4070 seems to at least be in decent supply, but I can't really confirm yet if they're going buck wild with supply on this one yet. And it wouldn't surprise me if the 4070 had good supply, but not insane supply, so that Nvidia could take a month to see if $600 was the right choice or not before they give the final go ahead or not to AIBs on where their pricing should average out to. So that's all I can say. There seems to be decent supply in the US at least, but I don't know yet if it's a boatload. So we'll have to see on that one. And okay, that is the first little thing I wanted to get to before I get to the rest of the subjects. Let me first now read an ad. This piece of content is sponsored by Vance Global. In March last month, I had a lot of stress caused by a tree going straight through my fence. Link in the description, by the way, to the pictures I shared on another broken silicon. And while Jesse simply thought it meant we were getting extra sticks to play with, I knew it meant making tons of calls and dealing with insurance. And look, a glass of Cabernet can help relieve stress, but too much of that, and you're heading down a road where it's going to be hard to get up every morning at a reasonable time and follow tech news. And that's why I don't think it's a bad idea to occasionally take a Vance gummy as an alternative. They're vegan, organic, lab-tested gummies made with pure ingredients with no unhealthy additives or scary cutting agents that can exist if you try to get something like this from that shifty guy down the street. Best of all, they're legal in most U.S. states, including Tennessee, where I'm located. Use offer code BROKENSILICON to get 20% off. And honestly, just clicking on that link in the description helps support the channel. Support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting Vance products if you want some today. All right, so that's the ad. Clicking on the description helps the channel a lot. Let me get to the final updates here while I tally up the tipped questions. Okay. Yeah, so let me get through these final things first. So I went through the 4070 update. I now just want to say one thing here that's kind of related to the 4070 situation, and that's the RDNA 3 reboot idea. So, yeah, I think there's really quite a big opening here with AMD and RDNA 3 after seeing how many recent releases have VRAM issues, mostly on Nvidia graphics cards. Again, let's be clear about this. When I say 8 gigabytes isn't enough for 1440p soon for most games, when I say 4K, you're probably going to want 16 gigabytes or more. I'm not saying that's like an Nvidia issue. It's just most people conclude it's Nvidia issue because AMD's 8 gigabyte cards were at lower end pricing for years now, and Nvidia's weren't. So, yeah, like a 6600 XT may have trouble with 4K soon, but I do think you can reasonably say most people did not get that for 4K. And it's been under $300 for like the past year or half year at least. And so, $200, the card being mostly for 1080p, I don't think anyone would complain about that. But when I look at Navi 33 and how that's configured to have 8 gigabytes, but it costs less to make than the 6600 XT. And then I look at Navi 32, which goes up to 16 gigabytes without doing any funky VRAM stuff. I go, you know, right now, AMD has a $1,000 24 gigabyte card. That's $200 less than its competitor from Nvidia that has only 16 gigabytes. Right now, AMD has an $800 20 gigabyte card. I bet they could afford to make that 750 as well. And I can't help but think that maybe AMD should just take Navi 32 and instead of cutting it down to 12 gigabytes for one of the models, just do 16 gigabytes for both of them. I see no reason, and maybe AMD should launch a 16 gigabyte Navi 31. I've actually heard that that might be something AMD is considering, by the way, for everybody listening. And so if it is, I would just tell AMD, you know, the 7900 XT seems to be selling okay with 20 gigabytes at 800. Launch a $650 16 gigabyte Navi 31 card. Launch a $550 16 gigabyte Navi 32, and then give the 7700 XT the cut down Navi 32. Give that 16 gigabytes as well for like 450. And if you do that, I really think there's an opening here for AMD to market RDNA 3 as a excellent choice because it really doesn't, I was talking to people in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord today, and they were talking about, NVIDIA's ray tracing advantage. And I'd make the argument, I really don't want to hear you talking about NVIDIA's ray tracing advantage, at least not in the latest games, certainly in games from a few years ago. Yeah. But if you're playing the latest games, NVIDIA really doesn't have a ray tracing advantage outside of the 4080 and 4090 because you have to turn down settings anyways to use ray tracing unless you have more than 12 gigabytes. So I don't know. I think that's a real marketing advantage there, especially like literally AMD could just show benchmarks 4K, 60 frames per second, ray tracing turned on with the 7800 XTX or whatever they call it. Nvidia Can't do that. Getting a lower frame rate, even with ray tracing on. Yes, it's because of VRAM, but this is a real chance. I think this is a real opening for AMD. And if they could bundle this, if they made this decision to give basically more than 16 gigabyte, or give 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and all cards above $450, and then launch FSR3, and then maybe improve their drivers a little more, the story's not over. AMD has a chance here. I just wanted to say that as well. And let me get through some of these tipped questions now before YouTube disappears them. So Spoonman writes in and he says, is RDNA 3 Plus dead? Any idea on if Navi 32 is 12 or 16 gigabytes? Well, perfect. This is what I was just talking about. So first of all, Navi 32 goes up to 16 gigabytes in the standard configuration because it has 4 MCDs. So it's 16 gigabytes. 12 gigabytes is if they decide to disable one of the MCDs. And I would make the argument that they should take 3 different yields from this, maybe. The top one should be 16, and then the second one should also be 16. And then eventually, if they have a stockpile of bad yields, that's when you launch the 12 gigabyte card for like 450. I think AMD was probably planning to launch a 12 gigabyte card for like $500 or something. I would advise them to keep it at 16 gigabytes. They're making they'd still make good profit margins, and this would be a great way, especially, you look at these recent benchmarks from Hardware Unboxed comparing the 6800 16 gigabyte to the 8 gigabyte 3070 Ti. Let's do this again, AMD. Launch a 16 gigabyte $500 graphics card that gets compared to the 8 gigabyte 4060 Ti. You have an opportunity here to make NVIDIA's ray tracing advantage not look like an advantage anymore and have something you can really market where you go, yeah, they have DLSS, but at least we have enough VRAM. And I think that's what AMD has to do because I just brought up Hardware Unboxed testing of the 6800 versus 3070 Ti. I mean, their testing of DLSS versus FSR is still pretty shocking. It's not to say that FSR isn't good, but it is to say that it still never seems to be better than DLSS in any game that has both of them. And so I just think AMD doesn't need to make their graphics cards half the price of NVIDIA anymore. They don't. They have good features, they have good software. I think their Adrenaline software stack actually is easier to use, faster, and slicker than the GeForce experience. They don't have DLSS, and NVIDIA's got a huge mindshare advantage. And so I think if they just take the same raster performance as NVIDIA, make it 30% cheaper, which they can certainly afford to do right now with the economics they get out of chiplets. If they can just do that and then give you more VRAM than NVIDIA, I think most people will choose Radeon this year. But they have to do that. They can't do this bullshit thing where they just charge like 10% less than NVIDIA, give you roughly the same amount of VRAM or more, but not a big deal, and then go, well, we're 10% cheaper and that should make up for DLSS because it really doesn't, at least not when you factor in NVIDIA's mindshare. And then to answer Spoonman's other question, is RDNA 3 Plus dead? Well, it's going to be in Strix. AMD's publicly said this. So no, RDNA 3 Plus is not dead. Although I'm not really getting clear indicators here that it's coming to desktop this year or something. I think it's probably more likely there's like an RDNA 3 refresh, but I can't say 100% yet. But uh, look, if RDNA 3 Plus was going to come out, you'd probably want it to come out this fall or early next year. Doesn't seem like there's a ton of smoke to that right now. And in a few months, if we don't have a ton of smoke, it's probably not happening. It's really the best answer I can give. Just remember too, RDNA 3 Plus could be a marketing name. Like if they fix Navi 31, got better yields, and it ended up being 30% better, they could just call it RDNA 3 Plus, even if it's not. Let's remember that as well. Let me see here. Meximan and Cheese writes in and says, I have a 3080 Ti 12 gigabyte gaming at 1440p. How long do you think I have with the VRAM? Should I just unload it now? Also, any ROG Ally leaks? No. To be fair, I haven't asked anything about the ROG Ally of anyone, so I have no leaks, but I haven't asked anyone about it. Let me write that down then. So, do you need to unload your 3080 Ti now? No, I think 12 gigabytes is probably going to be enough for 1440p for years. But it's like, just remember, because the way I want to answer this question is I see a lot of people ask, um, Well, how can devs allow this to happen with 8 GB graphics cards if most people have 8 GB or less? And the answer is they're just gonna expect you to play in 1080p, dude. Like, that's it. Like, you'll have I think in a year or 2, what's gonna happen is a third of games will require you to play in 1080p if you have 8 GB. A third of games, you'll be fine in 1440p, but you will struggle in 4K, and in 1440p, they're gonna expect you to turn down some settings. And then a third of games, it's gonna be on the borderline, and but those will be games that aren't using the latest features. That's why they don't need more VRAM. So that's how I would look at it. I don't think this year all games are going to kill 8 and 12 GB cards. It's not what's going to happen. But I think a third of games are going to struggle. A third of games are going to expect you to turn down settings, and a third they'll just expect you to be in 1080p. And so if you're in 1440p with a 3080 Ti 12 GB, I mean, look, you're probably fine for now. But just, I mean, I don't know. The 3080 Ti, I hope you got a good deal on it. That was never really a good price performance graphics card. And frankly, my answer to you is I had reasons for not recommending it besides the VRAM alone. But yeah. Let me see here. Lost there. Oh, that's an interesting question. Let me get to that one now. Let me see here. Let me also put a timestamp down. Oh, remember, hit the like button as well. We're almost to 1,000 viewers. Let's try to get to 1,000 likes. Let me put down the timestamp here. Losing CEOs. So Terminal Junkie put in a really big tip. Thank you for the support. But this person asks, what do you think would happen to the culture, goals, and success of Intel, Nvidia, and AMD if any one of them lost their CEO? Well, the way I'm going to choose to have you ask the question is, if they all lost their CEOs, what would happen? It's kind of hard to say. For Intel, if Intel lost its CEO right now, I think they would probably be hurt the most, actually, but it's too soon for me to be sure. I think that whether he deserves the credit or not, Pat Gelsinger inspires a lot of confidence at Intel, and I think there is a 50-50 chance that despite all the issues Intel has right now, anyone else would be doing a worse job, and it's kind of a thankless task at a certain point, fixing a broken company. I mean, again, guys, AMD almost went bankrupt in 2014, and it really wasn't until like 2018 or 19 that Lisa Su was revered like she is now. Like, I remember when I went to Hot Chips in 2019, she had this cockiness about her. She was sharp, she was quick, she could answer questions with a certain swagger fast. But that was 2019. Go watch the Fury unveiling, the gamers overclocking dream presentation, where there's a little more cautiousness there. And people in the comments section didn't revere her as some savior yet. She had to prove it over like 5 years or more. And so when you look at Pat Gelsinger, you go, I think there's a 50-50 chance if he was removed, Intel would collapse. Like, not permanently, but it'd be a very bad thing. He might be the person holding it together, inspiring confidence. Whereas with AMD, you remove Lisa Su, I get the impression AMD's a fully functioning company right now. It's not to say she isn't the best CEO for the job there right now, but I get the feeling someone else could take over and it's healthy again. They know what they're doing. And then you have Nvidia where, I think they could use a new CEO in a couple years, but right now, this second, I don't know. I hear Jensen Wang is just in charge over there. And the problem with Nvidia isn't, it's just, I don't know who you replace them with. And I mean that legitimately. I don't know. So to answer your question, what would happen if all of them lost their CEOs? I think AMD would keep functioning okay. Maybe a little worse, but be fine. I think there's a chance Intel needs Pat Gelsinger, at least for the next few years, to see at least whether it's the perfect vision or not. They need someone who had vision to see it through for like a decade. That's him. And then at Nvidia, it's really hard for me to say because like I hear that he like rules with an iron fist, but also that his vision for the company has done them wonders. And I don't know that Nvidia is ready for new leadership yet. I actually think they probably will be quite ready in 5 to 10 years if they transition into becoming like a new type of company. Like that's when you want a new CEO, when it becomes a new company. You have a person who transitions it, and then you have the guy or woman that takes over and knows what they're doing with the new company once it's formed. But it's not formed yet, so I don't know. I think Nvidia is probably in the middle of like how bad it would be in that question. All right, let's see. I believe there were some more tipped questions here. Let's see. Um, let's see. Marshmallow writes in and says, "Hi Tom, thanks as always. I'm not an investor, but I've noticed stock and analysts are flooding articles the last 2 weeks about Intel stock being a buy and for the biggest growth in decades. Why so optimistic?" Well, I think a lot of investors are probably looking at Intel and they're like, well, at least if I pay attention to rumors, it seems like Intel's Granite Rapids may be competitive with Zen 5. That's a far cry from them having like half of the efficiency of Zen 3 with Milan versus Cascade Lake or whatever Intel, or eventually, Ice Lake X as well. They're probably looking at what's going on now and going, it seems like Intel's starting to catch up. They're also probably looking at the fact that there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty in the world right now, and Intel has a bunch of fabs in the US and a ton of capacity. Yeah, their fabs aren't as good as TSMC right now, but at least from what I've heard, their fabs could catch up to TSMC in a couple of years. I know some people doubt that, and we'll have to see, but if you're an analyst, you're probably going, okay, Intel's behind and their stuff costs more to make, but it seems like they're starting to catch up. Also, there are factors besides the nerdy comparison of product to product where you go, it might be nice to have some US based fabs outside of Asia right now. That alone is a headwind. So, if I were to guess, that's what analysts are looking at. The problem is I think they might have to look at another major uncertainty or factor outside of just comparing the direct competitiveness of products. And that's that if Intel falls behind TSMC for the next 2 years still, and we go into a hard recession, Intel has all of this dormant capacity and they're behind in design and fabs. I mean, they could go bankrupt from that. Unused capacity is lost money. So if I was an analyst, that's what I'd be looking at. You know, is Intel actually going to catch up? Are they actually going to surpass TSMC with their fabs? If the answer is yes, will they be designing products that are competitive enough to fill up those fabs for the next few years? Because even if it is useful for Intel to have fabs in the US that they can sell to other people, at least from what I'm hearing, no one wants to work with Intel over TSMC unless Intel has a huge node advantage. Because let's say Intel's like 18A node is, I don't know, and again, don't quote me, just let's say that's like, you know, better than 3 nanometer and it comes out at the same time or something. Okay, but TSMC is better at executing and helping you design your product on the node, right? So even if Intel has a better node, TSMC is easier to work with. This is a big thing I dealt with in like automotive manufacturing, where like some suppliers to like GM and Volkswagen, you would go with them not because their product's necessarily better, but because they will help you design that product to fit in your car quicker, faster, on time, and just help you with your engineering tasks. And I don't think Intel's really developed as this fabless company yet that can take in outside designs and help you achieve your goal. Like TSMC can just help you. This is all they do, and they've been doing this without competing directly with you with their own designs for years, so for decades. So that's the other thing I think analysts might not get, is that even if Intel's fabs on paper catch up to TSMC, they're still gonna need to use their own fabs for their own designs for like 80% of the capacity for the next 5 years because of how much easier TSMC is to work with. All right, so hopefully, that helped, that question there, Colt Marshmallow. Let me continue scrolling down here and see what we got next. Let's see. Let me finish. You know what? I'll just skip. No, let's keep rolling with this here. Let's get to the GPU. Yeah, let's get to the GPU questions. here. So let me put down a timestamp. Let's see, 35. Okay, GDR7 VRAM dropping prices. Okay. Hamza Judah writes in and says, "What are the expectations with GDDR7 and how much it will help resolve the VRAM figurative cracks that are beginning to appear with new games?" Well, it's going to help Nvidia a lot, I think, because Nvidia, at least for the majority of their lineup, as I covered in my last video, is planning to stay monolithic and trying to use as small buses as possible. It seems like it. It seems like moving forward, and hopefully they'll change their mind on this or find a way to do it economically where they don't have to resort to this. But it seems like Nvidia moving forward probably wants the 4060 to have a 128-bit bus. They probably want the 70 class to have a 192-bit bus with Blackwell. And they want to keep the high-end 256-bit because of how much more expensive silicon costs are moving to newer nodes. Number one. Number two, so you'd want to save money no matter what with a smaller bus. But number two, also the IO doesn't really shrink at all on 3 nanometer from 5 nanometer. So you're wasting even more money because of that. And then number three, if you can keep a 128-bit bus, you can put this 5070 or 192-bit bus. You can fit the 5070 into the same laptops that had the 3060, right? Right, because they design on the board of the laptop a certain amount of space for the VRAM modules around it. And, NVIDIA likes to brag right now that you can get a 4090, in a thin 14-inch. It's like, well, yeah, NVIDIA, that's because the 4090 is only 256-bit. And before, you could have probably fit a 2080 Super or a 3080 in there as well. Couldn't you have, NVIDIA? So, but they see that as a big deal. They want to keep it that way because laptops more important to them and because silicon costs are going up. So for Nvidia, GDR7 is important because they can double basically RAM speeds next gen and go to higher capacity densities eventually. Kind of sounds like GDDR7 is going to have the same capacity limitations at first, though, unfortunately. So I don't know what they're going to do about that. But long term, you know, we're at 16 gigabit densities now. That's what gets you 8 gigabytes on a 128-bit card. They think they can get 24 and 32 and maybe 48 eventually, which, yeah, so you could get to 24 gigabytes on a 128-bit card maybe in 3 or 4 years. And well, then, yeah, that might solve NVIDIA's problems. They'd rather spend more for more expensive RAM to keep the bus smaller to fit it into more products and be more efficient on laptops. So GDDR7 is going to be essential to NVIDIA. They also seem to be hell bent on not using HBM, so they need it. For AMD, especially on desktop, I don't think it's quite as important. Like from what I've heard, RDNA 4 uses GDDR7, so they'll use it too. But AMD doesn't need to worry about the IO shrinking problems with chiplets. I mean, they can just use an updated version of the MCD they have now that supports GDDR7, and they can just use 8 MCDs if they want to. They can go up to 512-bit fine without it costing as much for them to do that. And then, yeah, so AMD, everyone benefits from newer RAM standards, but I think NVIDIA benefits from it more. And I think that it's going to be sorely needed in a couple years when a higher density GDDR7 comes out. The bad news is that it kind of sounds like we're not going to get those higher densities right away. It sounds like to me. And so I don't know what NVIDIA really does about that. I mean, if I'm being entirely honest, what I would advise NVIDIA to do, especially if they overproduce Lovelace like they might, because they thought it would sell like gangbusters in a booming market, but now we're in a recession. I think NVIDIA might want to just then consider launching like, you know, a 48 gigabyte 5090 with GDDR7 over a 384-bit bus, and then a 24 gigabyte uh 5080 Ti or whatever, you know, and then just basically launch only the 5070 and up with 192-bit and up so you have enough RAM. And then wait to launch the 5060 if it's 128-bit until that higher density RAM is available so you can give it 12 gigabytes or 16 gigs because I just don't think it's going to work. I don't think 8 gigabyte cards above $200 is going to make any sense in a year and a half from now. I just don't. So I would argue they should just wait until those densities are ready to launch the 5060. But that's my opinion on that. It's years away, so my opinion could easily change. Um, Abhinav T writes in and asks, should I get an RTX 3080 for $450 with a 2.5-year warranty or a 4070 for 750 with a 5-year warranty? I make content, so AV1 is a factor for me. Well, RDNA 3 supports AV1. That's kind of really silly because you're saying the 4070 in your country basically costs, well, maybe not twice as much, but 50% more. The 4070 is going to be the same performance, man. So, do you think it's worth paying 50% more for something that's the same performance? Yeah, it'll probably use almost half the energy as it's Lovelace, but I don't know, man. I would advise you check RDNA 3 pricing in your country, and if that's bad, I don't know. If AV1 is a huge factor to you and this is for work, I'm just gonna say, why would you get the 4070? Get the 4090. You avoid the VRAM issues, and this is making you money. If it's making you money, spend more to make more. But if it's not really making you money, and I talked about this in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord today, which again you get access to if you support us on Patreon. I made the argument that a lot of people arguing for these professional features with Nvidia aren't really using them. Like, I don't believe everyone here is an AI researcher, right? It needs CUDA. Some of you do, but I would make the argument that a lot of people saying that don't. And so AV1 better be a big factor for you if you're going to spend 50% more for the same performance. And if it is that big of a factor, I don't know why you're stopping at the 4070. Save up more, get a real professional card like a 4090 or something, or an actual professional card as well. That's my advice, though, without knowing more. Let me see here. Duh, duh, duh. Let's see. Okay, we got that question, that question. Let me get through some of these Patreon questions as well here before I get to the one from Sam Ross. Okay, so low res gamer writes in from the Patreon and asks, let me put a new timestamp for this as well. RDNA 3 fixed. Okay. Low res gamer asks, is AMD unable to resolve issues with RDNA 3 through driver updates? There's no sign of a 7800 XT yet, or 7700 XT for that matter, which would normally have been announced by now, 5 months after the high end launches. The distinguishing factor of the 7600 mobile as well seems to be the IO is monolithic, not using MCDs. And so it's great performance versus the 4060 and 4070 despite using 6 nanometer. Could be another sign that what you're talking about with multiple IO dies on RDNA 3 could be the culprit of Navi 31's like last minute bad performance or something. Yeah, so right now I just wouldn't bet Navi 31. The existing chips you have now is going to get some miracle driver that boosts its performance by 20%. I don't know though, but it's been this long, and I would make the argument that if they do boost it, it's probably another 5 to 10%, and any 20% boost is gonna have to come from some new edition of the silicon. And we'll have to see if it's fixed in Navi 32. But right now, it's just unfortunately like a month too early for me to give you a good answer. We need another month to see if something happens with drivers. We need to see how Phoenix performs in third-party integrated graphics reviews. And we need to see how Navi 33 performs in more third-party reviews. We still have very few reviews of Navi 33. And so until I see those, I can't say for sure. But at this stage, I wouldn't expect there to be some miracle driver. And you should never bet on a miracle driver. Like, if you'll remember, when I started leaking that apparently people at AMD think they can squeeze more performance out of Navi 31 with driver updates, I was skeptical because I feel like I've heard this story before. And I was surprised they actually thought they could. So until we see proof, buy RDNA 3 based on the current performance. So that's always what you should do, anyways. No matter what might happen, buy something based on what you'll get out of it now, because you don't want to be caught buying something in hopes it'll become magical in the future. So far, Alchemist buyers have gained 5% performance over like what the 6 months since it's been out. And by the way, since Alchemist has launched, AMD's boosted ray tracing performance with driver updates as well, basically negating the boost in Intel has boosted to Alchemist. You don't want to buy something based on future performance. Okay, and so let me see here. Sam Ross writes in and says, "Why hasn't AMD released a strong APU yet that will kill the low and mid tier?" Um, yeah, let me answer this here. Mega APU, and I think I actually have another APU question, so I'll probably get to that as well. Where was that? Let me see. Yeah, so I'll do that one next. All right. So, why hasn't AMD released a strong APU to kill the low end graphics cards yet? Well, I think the number one factor is that they are selling as many APUs as they can in laptops still. AMD, just I feel like I've given this spiel a million times this month, but I'm going to do it again. Everyone complains about the availability of AMD laptops. AMD took laptop market share last year. What that tells you is they're hard to get because people really are buying them the second they're stocked. And people I talk to in retail say that anytime a Ryzen 6900HS laptop came in stock, like that, it was sold out. That's what people want. They want an efficient 8 core in their laptops. That's what AMD makes. It's selling instantly. I did a review that was kind of an ad, but it was a mini review of the 7735HS. I found it could run Harry Potter at 1080p low at 60 frames, could play almost all games 1080p, lower medium or 720p high 60 locked. Even could play Metro Exodus with ray tracing turned up at like 720p. I mean, I'm sorry. I think that's almost killing budget graphics cards already. That is a 200 millimeter squared 6 nanometer APU that AMD doesn't have to provide a board for or a crazy GPU cooler for. They could totally afford to sell that APU that games like a 1650 Max Q or a little worse than that for $200 right now. Yep, that's not as good as a 6500 XT. The 6500 XT is probably 50% better or something or more. But it's still $200 that gets you a good 8 core with graphics that can play anything. Phoenix should be we'll still have to see. I think what do I think now like 25 to 50% better or something than Rembrandt. So what? That gets you to 1650 to 1660 performance? No, that's not going to be as good as the 5050 or the 7500 XT, but it is in an APU AMD could sell for 250 if they really wanted to. And it is good enough to play every AAA game in 1080p probably. Why aren't they launching that right now? They want to sell them in laptop, guys. They want to take laptop market share and they can make more money selling them in laptop, especially considering they can bundle those with AMD graphics cards. So, at the end of the day, I think the biggest contributing factor to why AMD hasn't released, and again, I understand these aren't strong APUs, but I think they are good enough to kill off most of the low end graphics cards. They haven't launched these to desktop yet because it just doesn't make sense. And then, based on that argument I just made, by extension, it doesn't make sense to launch anything stronger than that either. If AMD wanted to, right now, they could make a 250 millimeter squared APU that probably outperforms a 6500 XT if you have crazy good RAM to desktop on 5 nanometer. But at the end of the day, who is that really for? Is that overkill? Are people looking to save money on an APU? Probably going to be okay with something weaker than that. Yeah, that's why. It just doesn't quite make sense for them yet. But I think it could eventually. And it sounds like, at least what I'm told, the Ryzen 8000 products coming out later this year, like I said in my Zen 5 leak, I'm told those are APUs. So I would guess they're at least Rembrandt APUs, hopefully Phoenix APUs. And I don't know. We'll see what AMD decides to do. They might kill off basically sub $150 graphics cards this fall if they launch Phoenix to desktop, because we'll see what happens. A desktop Phoenix may be like 100 watts, and you could maybe push it past 3 gigahertz with like the fastest memory at the time. Yeah, I don't know. Like if they do that, that might do it right there. They just hasn't made sense for them to do it yet. All right. Frobos writes in from the Patreon and asks, Tom, please get out your crystal ball. What will future GPU performance enable in the next couple of generations? What upgrade cycles will it drive? Seeing the promise of the Asus ROG Ally and the reality of the Steam Deck make me think that integrated graphics and power efficiency will open up a whole new world of gaming decks running Windows and that double as portable computers with external peripherals. On desktop, I see immersion being the next frontier, massive curved wide screens, wireless AR and VR, games you can barely distinguish from reality. What are your thoughts? Oh yeah, honestly, guys, I think with like PlayStation 6 games, we're gonna start to see photorealistic games. I had a developer, Brian Heemskirk, on. By the way, someone that also was a developer that said 8 gigabyte graphics cards are going to have issues a few years ago. He turned out to be right, just like the Unreal Engine 5 developer that was just on, and also like the Infinity War developer that will be on soon, hopefully. Um, you know, he what what was I going to say? He said that if you had a 4090 like graphics card in a console APU, you could do photorealism right now. It's just the inefficiencies and the desire of devs to really push it holding us back. So that's happening. I think once you get, consoles that are like, you know, where would they be? So let's just think. If the PlayStation 6, let's just say it came out in 2026, so it'd probably be based on RDNA 4.5 or 5 or something. So that'd be on like 3 nanometer by then, probably. I mean, yeah, I think you'd be looking at something at least 4 times, 5 times better than a PlayStation 6. I mean, PlayStation 5. So yeah, you'd probably get performance like a 4090 in the PlayStation 6. And I know there's people freaking out right now, screaming at me. There's no way that's true. Guys, I'm saying in like 3, 4 years from now, after Blackwell Next is out, the mid-range card of that will probably something like that will be in the consoles. And yeah, so I think the next gen will have some games be pretty much photorealistic. In terms of the APU department, I actually put some thought into this question, and I think the thing we're gonna see is we're already getting a taste of what next gen APUs can do right now. Right now, you've got these Phoenix handheld gaming devices being announced that seem twice as strong as a Steam Deck, as you'd expect from an 8 compute unit RDNA 2 Steam Deck going to a 12 compute unit RDNA 3 device. So right there, you're probably gonna just do AAA gaming and 60 frames on a handheld. That's awesome. That's giving us a taste of that, but it's just a taste. I don't think we're really going to be there until Zen 6 and RDNA 5. I think Strix will turn up the flavor on the tastiness of feeling what the future of APUs will be, but I still get the feeling that Zen 6 and RDNA 5 is when we'll really get there. Because I don't think we're getting mega APUs that are hyper efficient to the point that they can outperform desktop graphics cards that are twice the power consumption until we really nail 3D stacking. Because the reason you see APUs perform far more efficiently, the reason you'll see a 25-watt Phoenix handheld perform like a 100-watt desktop graphics card from the previous gen isn't just the better node, it's the latency. The more complex these architectures get, the more we drill down in node, the more latency is a bigger and bigger determining factor in higher performance. And on desktop, unfortunately, we have these hyper powerful components far away from each other, wasting energy, sending electrons further than they need to go. So I think we're going to keep seeing this efficiency gap in sub 50-watt performance climb with APUs because of that latency advantage over the next 2 years, but I don't think until you have, like, 3D stacking really capitalizing on what you can do with low latency, making it so a die this big doesn't have to go across the whole die to communicate, but parts of it can just go straight up to a 3D stacked part, which saves even more power consumption, which drives up performance more in the low end. That's when. And I think that's Zen 6 and RDNA 5. RDNA 4 sounds like it's a headache for AMD engineers. If they nail it, they think they got a winner. But well, so that means I think RDNA 5 is when they'll probably fully come to terms and grasp what they can do with 3D stacking and chiplets and complex architectures in a way that isn't just powerful, but then expensive. But then they can translate that to the low end as well by, again, Zen 6 and RDNA 5. So, yeah, I think that should give you a peek into what's possible. I think what we're going to see, not this year, but we'll get a taste of it. Not next year, but we'll get a better taste of it. But maybe in 3 years is when you're going to see these big APUs that make sense in laptop because they could stack components as needed to save money on the cheaper stuff. You didn't stack it, so you save money. But then, okay, for this high-end product, we'll stack it once, and we didn't need to make another die to do that, or we didn't need to design a fully new die. We just needed to stack a little thing on top. And I think that's what's finally going to enable it. And I could even see a future where, like, by Zen 7 and RDNA 7 or something, I wouldn't be surprised if you started getting desktops where you have socketed graphics cards or socketed APUs, and the only thing you decide, I've talked about this years ago on my channel, like, I think in a decade, there's totally a chance when you build your PC, what you decide is the motherboard, the case, the power supply, and the APU. After that, the APU may come with stacked memory for what it needs for VRAM, and then you decide how much, like, CXL or DDR7 or whatever, you need as extra RAM for creators, and then you add storage, meaning you just select the right APU for the performance. Can't promise that. I don't think that's gonna happen in the next few years, but I think that's inevitably going to happen at least a little bit, once we get down to 2 nanometer and onwards. So, there you go, Frobos. That's my crystal ball. We'll see if I am full of crap in a decade, I guess, huh? Alright, let me continue going to some of these questions here. Let me see here. Let me see here. Let me shift to some more AMD and Intel questions here before I round it back down to the GPU pricing questions, just so I make sure I don't miss anything. Um, and Zen 5, 16 core stagnation. So yeah, let me get through that spiel and get through some CPU questions. So I had something I planned to talk about, which was Zen 5 likely, at least at first. No one's saying that Zen 5 long term can't use 3 nanometer and more than 16 cores on desktop with AM5. But at least it seems at first it's going to be 4 nanometer, limited to 16 cores again. And there's been a lot of people worrying about 16 core stagnation out of AMD. And you Zen 2, Zen 3, Zen 4, Zen 5, 16 cores on desktop. So that what would that be 2025, 2024 when Zen 5 comes out? So yeah, you'd be looking at 5 years of only 16 cores on the top of desktop. The funny thing is when I prepared that for this loose ends, I expected way more people to write in from the Patreon saying how bad that is. No one really seems to care. And I think it's because a lot of people understand this. If Zen 5 brings 25 to 40% better performance to desktop across the board next gen and doesn't raise prices, that's good. Another, year and a half later, another year to a year and a half after Zen 4, another huge performance boost overall without raising prices, which is plausible because they're keeping it on 4 nanometer. It shouldn't cost any more than the 5 nanometer they're using for Zen 5 or Zen 4, or if it is, it's minimal. So that if they can sell a 16 core for under 600 right now, there's no reason they can't sell a 30% better or something 16 core next year for the same price, $600. And I think no one cares as long as AMD at least offers Threadripper at the same time. Because I don't think people right now need more than 16 cores on desktop. I think AMD might want to change that with Zen 6, but if the prices don't go up, they just go down from now or stay the same. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you can complain if you want, but you have to remember a Zen 4 6 core is the same multi-threading performance almost as a 3900X12 core. And as long as this cadence continues and pricing stays the same or actually goes down, I think people will be happy. If you can get a 6 core for under 200, an 8 core for under 300, a 12 core for 400 or something, and a 16 core for 500 to 600, I don't think anyone cares as long as you can also get Threadripper at the same time, which I will say it's about time this happens. Intel used to offer HEDT because their server chips were like 20 cores and their desktop chips were quad cores. So they were like, let's give at least 10 cores or 6 cores even to high-end desktop HEDT. That's why Intel did that, because their desktops at a certain point were like less than a fourth the core count of their server parts. We're not there. Well, are we there yet with AMD? We're getting there with AMD, where 16 cores is a fourth the 64 core. Now we're at 96. You know, when AMD moves to 128 cores with Zen 5, I think it's about time you offer at least a 96 core Threadripper AMD, because we're not asking you to give us a ludicrous amount of cores to desktop that no one's actually going to use. But at a certain point, there should be some workstation thing to bridge the gap, and it's about time AMD refreshes Threadripper. So that's my little spiel about Zen 5 16 core stagnation. I had it in the title, so I had to get to it. And Shrakeel writes in and says, have you heard anything about AM5 B750 or X770 boards, new capabilities when they'll become available? I'm wondering if it's better to wait for them to go with go with current offerings. Let me write that down. Them AM5 B750 X770. So, I mean, or it'd be like X790, don't you mean? Right? 670. No, it's 670. It's 70. That's Intel. So from what I'm hearing, the IO die in Zen 5 is upgraded from Zen 4, but not a ton. My guess is you're getting like support for like 30 to 50% faster DDR5 over Zen 4. You're going to get a bit more IO, a bit faster IO, and you're going to get 2 compute units of RDNA 3 instead of RDNA 2, maybe. That's what I think. And if you think about it, the reason they go from 2 compute units of RDNA 2 to RDNA 3 is just to update the outputs of IO anyways for the displays. So based on that, and I know it's not the same thing, but based on that minor IO upgrade to Zen 5's IO die, I don't know. I just guess that on desktop, if there is an X770, which I can't claim to know anything about it yet, I've never claimed to know anything I don't know. I would speculate that what AMD is going to do is a minor update. It could feel big to some people, like maybe they'll go from supporting 4 NVMe 5.0 lanes for the SSD to 8 or 12, and maybe a few more support for USB. But I'm not expecting a giant leap. I'm expecting a slight increase, trying to keep prices the same and keeping up with Z890 from Intel with either Meteor Lake or Arrow Lake. So that's what I would expect about that. But I can't claim I know. So I'm not going to claim I do. Let me see here. We'll see. Now, let me get through some of these CPU Zen 5 questions before I go back to talking about graphics cards here. Owen with a hammer. So, I am Patty Cakes writes in from the Patreon and asks, the one thing I didn't hear from your Zen 5 leak was information on memory. That's definitely one thing that Intel has on AMD right now. The possibility to run insanely faster 8,000 mega transfer RAM. Well, at all. AMD can't even really run them past 6,200. I know that Zen 4's memory controller struggles to even run 4 DIMMs with faster than 5,200. And for running a local cloud developer workstation, fast RAM is definitely appreciated for our database performance. Are we going to be seeing better memory with Zen 5 performance? Or is the IO die not really something they were focusing on? Well, I don't know what you missed, I am Patty Cakes, but in my Zen 5 leak, I said they validated, I think 52 or 5600, I believe, for all DIMMs with Turin Zen 5 on server right now, which right now they only like support 4800. So instead of 4800, they've already validated, I think, 52 or 5600 for Turin, and they are almost done validating 6400, and they're trying to get to at least 7200. So think about what I'm saying. Zen 4 server, 4800 megahertz. Zen 4 desktop, 6000. Okay. Zen 5 server, 7200. Zen 5 desktop, probably at least 8,000. I wouldn't worry about it. Do I know if it will be as fast as Arrow Lake or Meteor Lake or whatever? No. But I do know that I am not worried about that at all right now with Zen 5. And that's something they're going to drastically improve by at least 30% in memory speed. Chris Rich writes in and he asks, are AMD's CPU design teams more flexible than Intel's? Your recent Zen 5 leak suggested to me that they can keep their options open until fairly late in the design process and then make non-trivial last-minute changes if they have to. Have you ever gotten similar impressions from Intel's design teams? And I don't mean simply axing individual products, not that type of flexibility. In addition, it seems like Turin taped out after Granite Rapids and Sierra Forest, but will hit the market sooner. It's not good for Intel's competitiveness either. Uh, so what I would just say is AMD just seems to have less configs to worry about compared to Intel, as I covered in links in the description in my Intel's Nerfed Future leak, where I talked about the updates to core counts for Granite Rapids, Meteor Lake, Sierra Forest, um, and why AMD with less money is able to avoid so many downgrades and cancellations. And a chart I put on screen in the second half, again, links in the description, Intel's Nerf Future League, is AMD with like, I don't remember exactly the numbers, like 3 or 4 dies. So like one IO die, 2 types of core chiplets, and then like maybe one other type of IO die or accelerator. They can make like 10 different products. Intel, meanwhile, I'm told had to design at least 2 different dies, maybe 4 just for Sapphire Rapids. Not AMD. They can have a Genoa IO die, desktop IO die, 2 chiplet types. You get Sienna, Raphael, Genoa, you know, Dragon Range on laptop. Intel has to design like 3 different versions for laptop and desktop, 2 or 4 versions just for Sapphire Rapids. Sierra Forest has its own designs. Like, it's crazy. Intel has to design like twice as many chips to have less products than AMD. And because of that, despite Intel being a far larger company than AMD, there's just so much more room for something to go wrong. This is on track, but this isn't. And we have to design all these different chips. AMD, nail the core chiplet, nail the IO die. We're ready to launch a bunch of products. That's all they got to do. They can share them between these product types. So I that is why AMD is able to do this. They just have a simpler approach that allows them to share more stuff. And Intel is just bloated, designing all this different stuff for specific markets. And frankly, Intel also hasn't had a fire lit under its ass like this in history. And so they've probably gotten used to not having to like do everything exactly perfectly. And what I mean by that is because Intel hasn't been pressed as hard as they have been ever before right now, that means, if one team's a little late here, okay. Next year, maybe they won't be. But if you have like 10 different teams working together from all over the world, like Intel does, and they do have design teams all over the world, they're a huge company. They're all trying to work on different things. And you take something like Ponte Vecchio. If this team's late, it holds up everyone. If this team's late, it holds up everyone. They're not always late, but if there's 10 teams working on one product, you see where like one could hold them all up, and they've never had to like work perfectly before. Like, and now they do. And so they're just coming to terms with everyone individually without oversight, having to execute perfectly and then combine everything together. And there's still just a lot of teething pains out of Intel. And hopefully they improve so they can keep some competition in the CPU market. All right, let me now rotate back to okay. Let's see here. All right. Yep. Let me move back to GPU pricing. GPU pricing crashes. All right. So Dino999 writes in and says, "Hello, Tom. Earlier in the year, on multiple occasions, you said to wait a few months to see change in Nvidia's GPU prices. Well, it's been a few months and only the 7900 XT has dropped in price from what I can tell. Are these prices here to stay, or should we still be patiently waiting a little longer for Nvidia pricing to go down?" Well, Dino999, number one, I said I expected Nvidia's prices to maybe crash late summer. It's not even summer yet. We're still in spring. Second of all, I don't know where you are, but if you go to Newegg right now in the US, I can see refurbished 4090s for below MSRP. I can see new 4090s for MSRP. That wasn't true a few months ago. I can see 4080s, brand new ones, not even refurbished, brand new, below MSRP. There are sub MSRP 4080s right now. And the 4070 has been priced more aggressively than expected. Those are prices going down. So they are going down, but I mean, I don't expect Nvidia to feel the full extent of the pain if they do until months from now. They can hold out more than a few months. You should never just expect some drastic change in like 1 or 2 months. And I didn't say you should, but if you look, they are cheaper than a few months ago. Before the 4090 was 2 grand, the 4080 was like 1300, and the 4070 Ti was 850 or more on average. Now we're looking at a situation where they're launching a $600 GA104 card. Still think it's too much, but it is still cheaper than expected. And the 4090 and 4080 can be bought for below MSRP. That was not true in December. man. Um, Owen with a hammer writes, and it says, when do you suspect a GPU pricing crash will occur? RTX 5000 series, 6000 series, never? What's most likely going to instigate it? I'm sick of leaks for $1,500 graphics cards. I mean, it wa when do I six I'd say the GPU pricing crash is already happening. It's just don't expect all of it to happen in 1 month. But we're still like, guys, we're almost like half the GPU pricing we saw just a year ago. Where were we? April 2023. Like prices are the 6950 XT is like almost $600 now. Come on. Like it's happening. What I don't know though, like Dino 999 and Owen with a hammer is what you expect. Do you expect the 4090 to be $800? That's never going to fucking happen, guys. Okay, so there. Like if that's your definition of a pricing crash, an $800 4090, I think at $800 the 4090 is losing money on each sale. I don't think that's going to happen. When might you see a 4080 hit $1,000 if the 4070 doesn't sell well? This fall or late summer. That's what I think. Now, will there be some seismic readjustment where like Blackwell per tier is priced better? Not without some pretty drastic things happening to Nvidia's earnings, if you ask me, where they're like, hey, we got to do something. And that's what Intel was forced to do with Raptor Lake pricing. So, you know, the pricing crash is happening. I hope it continues to happen. And actually, Dave Schultz writes in from the Patreon and he says, hey, Tom, I'd be interested to hear about your opinion on mobile GPU pricing. For example, here in Europe, at least where I live, the 4090 mobile laptops cost around the same as a desktop 4090. What kind of BS is this? The mobility 4080 chip, I mean, what they're calling the 4090 and laptop is a mobility 4080. So a 4080 that doesn't even have to clock as high as the desktop variant, and they're selling that laptop for the price of a 4090. Where do you think pricing will go in the mid to long term future, considering mobile GPU variants? It all depends on if people buy this bullshit. Do people buy $4,000 4090 laptops, $3,500 4080 laptops, and $2,500 4070 laptops in bulk? Do they buy $1,000, $1,200 4050 laptops in bulk? If they do, it ain't going anywhere. I suspect people won't, though. And it's just too soon to say what's happening there. And that's one side of it, just people rejecting NVIDIA's prices in general. The other half of it is, does AMD launch a decent amount of $1,000 to $1,200 7600 MXT laptops? These are 6 nanometer, 8 gigabyte GPUs that should perform as well as a 4068 gigabyte laptop, or maybe even some of them up to a 4070 laptop. If that happens and it's $1,000, every retailer I talk to says that people wanted Rembrandt and they're going to want Phoenix. So if AMD can launch like $1,200 laptops that have a 7600 MXT and Phoenix, I think it'll still sell well with Rembrandt, but it would have to be under 1,000. But if they can bundle Phoenix with the 7600 MXT for the same price as Nvidia is trying to sell 4050 laptops, I think a lot of people are going to say, holy crap, this laptop has Phoenix. Oh, it doesn't have Nvidia. Oh, but that card's better than a 4060. Sounds good to me. That's where you'll see AMD selling these laptops that are as good or better than Nvidia's $2,000 laptops for half the price. And then that's what would make Nvidia lower prices. But that has to happen before Nvidia lowers prices, because Nvidia apparently bet the farm this generation that everyone was going to go buy a $4,000 laptop. I think they're wrong, but they're not wrong until you guys make them wrong. And so that's what it comes down to with all of this pricing discussion. All right, let's get to the couple more of these GPU pricing questions. So King Harkinian writes in and says, AMD's GPU prices keep dropping, both for the 6000 and 7000 series. It's gotten so ridiculous that recently Daniel Owen compared a 3070 Ti 8 gigabyte with a 6950 XT because they had equal pricing, despite one being like, yeah, what would that be, like 60%, 50% better with double the RAM? Is AMD pressured by the supply and lack of sales, or are they trying to be more price competitive? And how much longer until Nvidia has to crack on pricing. Even if they sell off to the pro market, nobody's buying a fleet of 3070s, I don't think. So I think something people have to remember is that a lot of these 3070 Ti's you're seeing listed, not necessarily selling well, but at least listed online for $600 to $700. A lot of retailers and AIBs paid like $600 or more for them. And then the prices crashed. And I don't know. I think there's an argument that a lot of these overpriced 3070 Ti's are a result of AIBs and retailers being stubborn, or maybe you would say desperate to not take a huge loss on this volume. That I actually think is half of it. Whereas AMD was, selling to AIBs 6950 XTs for $700 for a couple months now. And so they're happy to sell them for $700. But if they got a 3070 Ti for the same price total, they don't they don't want to deal with that. Or put it another way, you know, if an AIB bought, or let's say a retailer, a smaller one, buys 10 6950 XTs for 700 and they're hoping to sell them for 750. If the average price they end up selling them for, maybe some of them eventually need to be discounted, is like $720, whatever. We made 20 times 10, $200 total. And hopefully the people, half of them that came in to buy the 6950 XT and get this deal, maybe they've also bought an SSD power supply or motherboard and CPU as well. So maybe we only made $20 on average on the 7950. Maybe even some of them lost money, but they bought something else when they came in the store. We're happy. Okay. Now, if the 3070 Ti was bought for $500 or $600 and they're desperate to sell them for 650, you might go, well, okay, so they're making the same profit margin on a 3070 Ti. And it's like, maybe, but what if they bought 100 3070 Ti's, whereas they only bought 10 6950 XTs? If they only bought 10 6950 XTs, maybe they're happy to only make $20 on them to get them out of the shelves. They only have 10 to get rid of. Screw it. Maybe this deal will bring 100 people into the store. 10 people will buy them. 90 people will get there and go, oh, they're sold out. Well, I'll buy this anyways. No one's coming to the store for a $700 3070 Ti. And even if you're making a bigger profit selling it for 650, you got 100 of them. And then, so you see what I'm saying? Like, it makes sense to sell a small quantity of RDNA 2 cards at cost because you're getting rid of them. You only bought 10 of them. But if you were to sell all 100 of your 3070 Ti's below cost, you bought 100 of them, that's more of a net loss. And it's probably not as attractive to people to see that, and not as many people come in the store. And so I don't know. I think a lot of retailers and AIBs bought up these cards during the end of the shortages. We're hoping to sell them for inflated prices. And now they're like, look, we'll go out of business if we don't at least make $20 on them. This is half of our warehouse. I guess let's just hope people buy them for $20, profit margin each. Like, I honestly think that's a factor people aren't considering here. And, it's something that AMD would care less about. They made less RDNA 2 than Nvidia. I think I did an analysis with the AMD has to go for a market share video. I think it was that one where I showed Nvidia may have double the oversupply of AMD. And so that means with AMD, who cares if you lose a little bit of money? Just get rid of what's left. You didn't make that many too many. Whereas Nvidia made a ton too many. And so if they lose this game of chicken where people start undercutting them, that's a ton of volume that loses money, as opposed to AMD. Let's just get rid of it now, so we're not the ones left holding the bag because we can't afford to be. So again, things to consider with why RDNA 2 may go down in price faster than Ampere. Co-Addict writes in and says, hi, Tom. You mentioned that 2 more of NVIDIA's partners are considering pulling out. No, I didn't, but it's not concrete yet. I think that if it's just 2 partners lost for the next generation, they can still manufacture enough cards to saturate the market. And as they ramp up production of Founders cards, I don't know. It just seems like NVIDIA's abusive behavior may be calculated so that they can always replace the lost partner capacity by upping their internal production over time, losing a partner maybe every couple years, but then they take that market share for themselves. Do you think by the 60 series they can afford to drop all of their AIB partners entirely, or is that the plan for the 70 series? I never said 2. I said it wouldn't surprise me if they lost more in the future, and I have 1 in mind. I think I said that. If I didn't, that's what I have. I have 1 in mind. People aren't guessing it, by the way. I'll drop that hint too, which surprises me. People are guessing some of the last ones I'd expect to pull out. But anyways, you know, do I think Nvidia will go AIB-less in the next 5 years? No, because Nvidia is very happy right now that Asus, MSI, PNY, Zotac have just mountains of these cards sitting in warehouses, and that they have to handle the warranties. Nvidia doesn't want to have to handle all those warranties. Nvidia doesn't want to have to handle all that shipping themselves. Maybe over the course of 10 years, they wouldn't mind if they had less AIBs, but I don't think they have any desire to have no AIBs in the next 5. I don't. I think that they just know they can get away with treating them like shit, and so they are. And that's really all there is to it. It's not they want them to lose. It's that they don't care if EVGA drops out if they can increase their profit margins by 5 to 10%. Yeah. So let me scroll down here. All righty. Let me get to some of these tipped questions, and I hope I didn't delete any. Okay. So Evil Samuel writes in and says, any information on Navi 32? The lack of RDNA 3 leaks is maddening. Well, you already know what you need to know about RDNA 3, I'd argue, especially since we have no idea if they can execute the rest correctly. We know Navi 33 is, at least it seems like, the performance of like a 3060 Ti if you push it really hard. Could end up, almost Navi 21 1080p performance. Could, but we don't know that yet. We know at least 3060 Ti. What that tells you is AMD could, if they want to, launch an 8 GB card that performs like mid-range cards from last gen for $300 if they want to. I don't think you need to know any more about Navi 33 than that. We also know that Navi 32 is, what is it, like, isn't it 3,840 stream processors? Wasn't that 64 times or something? What or was it? It was like 7,680. And let me see, divided by 2. Yeah. So yeah, you're looking at something then, and then let's divide that by 6,144. Yeah, so we already know Navi 32's GCD is two-thirds the size, two-thirds the stream processors of Navi 31, and that it has two-thirds the MCDs. So if AMD can clock Navi 32 faster than Navi 31, if it has some fixes, and it kind of sounds like it at least has some minor ones, that means you should expect top Navi 32 to perform 70 to 90% as well as, like, well, say 70 to 80% as well as Navi 31 or something. And that means that it'll probably be 10 to 20% behind the 7900 XT. If it's just 10% behind, that means Navi 32 did have some fixes in it. And they're going to sell you something only 10% worse than a 7900 XT, probably for like $600, which is the other thing I'd say about Navi 32 people keep forgetting. It has about the same, it has a smaller die size overall than Navi 22. So Navi 32 products have an overall silicon size smaller than the 6700 XT. It's just that a little more than half of it is 5 nanometer. So overall, you're looking at the cost of this Navi 32 being definitely less than 21, meaning I think they could sell a 16 GB card for, 550 minimum, maybe 500 or less. So that's all you need to know. 10 to 20% worse than the 7900 XT probably, and they can probably price it, 30% less or something. That's what you need to know. Without knowing the specifics, I'm sorry you find this maddening, but we don't know until AMD makes the decision. They make that decision, not me. Doesn't matter what I know about these upcoming products, how they decide to segment them, price them, that's their prerogative. So no amount of information will tell me exactly what's going to happen with AMD. So let me see here. Marshall Pierce, let me see here. So let's start shifting over then to some more CPU questions. Yes. Okay. All right. Let me see here. X3D, Arrow Lake, After Lake refresh, Meteor Lake. Let's just get all of these next gen and upcoming gen CPU questions out of the way now. And don't forget to click the link in the description, support the sponsor if you want to, and hit the like button. So Marshall Pierce writes him. He says, do you think AMD will ever release X and X3D designs at the same time with an upcoming generation, or is that a design-based delay? Well, so No, I think it takes more time for them to validate, prepare, and launch the X3D variants with Zen 4. But if you'll notice, the 5800 X3D, what did that launch? A year and a half after Zen 3 launched? All right, Zen 4 X3D launched half a year after Zen 4 launched. I think it stands to reason that Zen 5 X3D could launch, you know, less than half a year after, maybe in the same initial lineup, but it still probably takes a little more time to work on, so I wouldn't bet on that yet. Now, when it comes to Zen 6, though, I think Zen 6 may fundamentally just be doing things differently. When it comes to Zen 5 versus Zen 5C, I think I already leaked this. I'm not even sure there will be a Zen 6C. I think it's so far away, it's 3 years away that they actually might need the C might be more than just a less cache, lower clocked variant. They might do something. They might have an entirely different architecture. They may fork Zen 5C to go to crazy high core counts behind Zen 6 cores. I don't think Zen 6 does things the same way as the other generations yet, or at this stage. So for that reason, my answer is I think there's a chance Zen 5 launches with X3D variants at launch. There's a chance, but it still might launch them like 3 months later. But that wouldn't be crazy, right? Like the 3950X launched a month or I think 3 months after like the 3900X or something. So it might be in the same launch window with Zen 5. I think that's plausible. But then with Zen 6, I think it might be so different that there's no point in me speculating on if there's an X3D version at launch or not. That entire concept may be outdated by then. So that'd be my answer to that question. Um, let's see here. Michael Grubbs writes in and asks, "Will gaming on Apple ever get better as far as dev support for the M chips?" It's hard for me to say because it's not like there's an Apple console per se. I know there's those minis, and it's not like their market share is high enough in desktop or laptop to warrant devs taking it as seriously. Like, if we're being honest, devs probably look at Apple gaming support. Number one, you know, is probably AMD graphics because they have consoles. Um, and so depending on how you shake that up, it's probably like number one console AMD, number two Nvidia desktop, number three desktop AMD. But those are, the console and AMD is kind of intermingled, so it's like hard to exactly define it. That's like way up here. And then number four is probably Intel graphics because they have a ton of mobile market share with integrated graphics. Alchemist usually isn't doing anything for devs, from what I've asked or from what they've told me. Uh, but Intel has a ton of mobile market share, so you want to put some support into integrated Intel graphics. And then after that is probably Apple. So that's how I'd look at it. I don't see anything fundamentally changing that in the upcoming few years. I just think if Apple works with devs more and can get more sales, then devs will take it more seriously. But I see dev support of Apple laptops not going backwards, maybe slightly improving year over year, but I don't see some big seismic shift in the percentage of games supported on Mac anytime soon, from what I'm hearing. I just don't. It's not something I hear any dev bring up, where they're like, "We're making a big push with Apple." I haven't asked, but if that was happening, you'd think they'd say to me, "Hey, by the way, the next game's gonna really use Apple," but literally no one has said that. And maybe they'll write into my emails after watching this and say, "Oh, you're wrong. I should have mentioned that." But for now, I don't really see Apple graphic support going up or down anytime soon. One second here. Let's see. All righty. So let's see. Denvero1G1 writes in and says, "My biggest problem with the 40 series is that the margins go up the farther down the stack you go. The 4070 Ti is less than half the card of the 4090, and probably therefore has higher yields. Yeah, probably does. And yet it's half the price. Yeah, it probably does have better margins. It might. And so yeah, I don't know what else to say to that. I think, do I have that question in here? Let me see. Yeah, so Denvera, let me put a timestamp for this here. Um, and then let me see. Is Nvidia buttering Pricing. Okay. So Dino999 writes in, kind of related to what you said, Denvera 1G1, and asks, is the high price of Lovelace Nvidia slowly warming us up for what's to come with Blackwell on 3 nanometer? Yes, I think they are. I think there's no way around it. I think what Nvidia is doing with their Lovelace pricing is they know that 3 nanometer is going to be at least 50% more expensive than 4 nanometer, and that already the 4090 would probably be losing money below $900. And they also know that if they're going to go crazy, whether that means like an 800 millimeter squared, a dual stitch together 2 nanometer one, whatever, that they're going to make things more expensive in the future because they're going to be mostly monolithic. They're not the top customer with TSMC like AMD is. And so they know that they want to, I think Blackwell, I think they're probably targeting 40 to 60% higher performance than the 4090 at least. And they want that to be $2,000 to $3,000. They want to say, here's your $1,600 4090. Here's something 60% better than that for 2,500. If they can get away with it, that's what they want to do. And they want to defend that price point. I think they regret losing it. They had a $3,000 Titan Volta. They had a $2,500 Titan RTX, but then AMD started competing more again. And I know some people think they're not, but guys, come on. Don't kid yourselves. The 7900 XTX being 20% behind a 4090 is not like during the Polaris era where the top, before Turing came out, even, I mean, like, what? The top GPU was Volta, Titan Pascal, XP, the overclocked version with all the CUDA cores, then 1080 Ti, then Vega maybe tied with 1080. So it went Titan Volta, Titan Pascal, 1080 Ti, Vega slash 1080. AMD wasn't 20% behind Volta. They were like several cards down the stack. And before Vega came out, Polaris was there, and it was just scary looking at like how, like, I mean, before that came out, they were what? Titan Pascal, 1080 Ti, 1080, 1070 Ti, 1070, and then Fury, then Polaris. Like, it was bad. AMD's not that far behind, and that's what forced Nvidia to abandon charging $2,500 for the top card like they did for 3,000 with Titan Volta and for 2,500 with Titan RTX. So I think they want to get back there. I think they want to juice Blackwell as much as they can. Even if it doesn't profit below like $1,500, they'll say, whatever, we want to get to 2,500 or 3,000 and say, from now on, if you want the top gaming NVIDIA chip, it's going to be this crazy hopper-like complex monster that costs $3,000. And then we're just going to make 400 millimeter squared and smaller cards moving forward. And those are all going to be 1,200 or less. 4080, 380 millimeter squared die. I think NVIDIA is totally trying to prepare everyone for a future where their top card is some crazy AI beast that costs thousands of dollars. And then the 80 class is really a mid-range card they're selling for 1,200, but they have better software, they'll argue. Yeah, I think that's what NVIDIA is doing with Lovelace. I think that is half of the reason they're charging so much is they know they can get away with it this gen. And they know that prices are going up. I don't think Nvidia's or Jensen's full of shit when he says he thinks Moore's law is dead. I talk to people at Nvidia. They say the same thing. They're like, silicon costs are going up. We got to get people used to higher prices and then just make our software better. That is Nvidia's plan, guys. And I think Lovelace is the first step to trying to convince everyone that a $600, 24% cut down mid-range die is okay to sell for as the 4070. They're trying to get you used to it. There's just no doubt about it. All right, let me keep going here. I think I've gotten to all the tipped questions I can see. Yes, at least they're not appearing on YouTube for me right now. So that's all the tipped questions. Let me at least get through the remainder of the Patreon questions then. And I'd say you guys got about another 20 minutes to maybe 15 minutes to ask questions. So if you have a tipped question, put it in now. Otherwise, hit the like button. And I will just keep rolling here for a little bit longer. Let me send one message now, though. I apologize. Just have to send one message for my personal life. Okay, let's get back to the questions then. And we have another GPU question, so let's hammer that out since I was just talking about that. Let's see here. All right. Alex Vega writes in and he says, "Hi, Tom. Assuming NVIDIA does transition to being an AI focused company in 5 years or so, then is it reasonable to speculate that NVIDIA would further shift their focus from gaming to data center? If they do you think there needs to be an actual third player in the space? Or do you see AMD eventually making NVIDIA want to innovate and go with non monolithic designs?" Yeah. So Blackwell. Let me put a timestamp just for this one, actually, since it's in the title. Blackwell Whispers. So, and I leaked this in my last video. There is a non-zero chance that Blackwell could be using chiplets in the top end. But when I hear it that it's unlikely, or it's less likely than that it's monolithic again. And when I hear that everything besides the top die will be monolithic, which remember, right now with RDNA 3, most of RDNA 3 is going to be multi-chip already. Navi 31 and 32 are multi-chip, 33 is monolithic. So 2/3 of the lineup should be using chiplets. NVIDIA, it'd probably be like the top third at most. When I hear about that, you know, what that tells me is they're only going to want to do it if they have to, but they might. And it's kind of just based on where their technology's at. In other words, I don't really think it's AMD making them do it. I think they think, and the total amount of silicon in Navi 31 is 520 millimeters squared about. So, right, NVIDIA has 20% more silicon, all monolithic now, and they can go up to over 800 millimeters squared with Blackwell. So they can make a card 20% bigger than the 4090 on 3 nanometer, ramp up clocks, make it use 600 watts. Even if AMD made something 50% bigger than Navi 31, they would still be using less silicon than Blackwell, most likely, guys. So I think NVIDIA thinks they can get away with this for another generation for sure. But if they don't, it's because they got chiplets working. And if they do, it's not going to be as elaborate as AMD. It's probably going to be kind of like MI 250X looking or something, right? 250X? Was that what I'm thinking of, right? Is it 250X? I think that's right. Yeah, the one with like the two CDNA chiplets. It'll probably look something like that. I think they want to use chiplets to save on cost some and scale performance higher. It's less about what AMD is doing, where they're making something smaller than Navi 22 with Navi 32 to save money. So, will AMD eventually make NVIDIA want to innovate again with non monolithic designs? NVIDIA's already experimenting with non-monolithic. If they go with it, it's because they got it working sooner rather than later. And I think that I don't see Intel changing this. When I ask NVIDIA people what they think about Intel's upcoming products, they think they're not even going to be half as good as our top stuff. So, could we use a third player in the market? Sure. But guys, I'm going to state the obvious. This is really hard. There's a reason there's only two big graphics companies. It's because it's really hard to do giant, dedicated, separate graphics cards well. And, I think if someone's going to make NVIDIA change pace, it's going to be AMD. But if they go with chiplets, it's because NVIDIA thought that was the right decision, not because AMD made them, at least not yet. Could that change once AMD has like these elaborate Navi 50 designs? It could change, but by then NVIDIA is hoping to be an AI company anyway. So I don't know. I think I'll just leave it like that before I just start repeating myself. Let us see here. Okay, so I've got some final CPU questions. Again, final call on tipped questions if you guys are going to submit them. Let's see here. Let's go to here. All right. Let me see here. Yeah, so let's just put like RPL, MTL, ARL versus AMD, and let's put the timestamp. Okay. Anyways, Get Us 11 writes in and says, "Hi, Tom. Considering that Intel was still giving incentives for customers to accelerate purchases of its products in quarter 4 of last year," this is the Alder Lake oversupply thing that I've talked about before. He asks, "Would it be possible that Intel is burning its inventory at a slower rate than AMD, and therefore AMD's client revenue would rebound before Intel's? Would retailers and OEMs increase their purchases from one company if they still have a glut of their other company's inventory?" Um, let's see. Your first question. Yes, I think so. I think, without a doubt, there is a chance you could see AMD's revenue rebound sooner because Intel stuffed the channels with Alder Lake before raising prices on all of their products. And you right now go to Newegg, there are Alder Lake laptops being bundled with 4050s for the most part over Raptor Lake. And that's because in the low end, most OEMs just want to get rid of Alder Lake. And so, yeah, I think AMD will rebound quicker because Intel stuffed the channels. It's a short term thing to do, as usual. Still thinking short term, it seems. And I do I think OEMs would therefore increase their purchases with AMD while they're still trying to get rid of Alder Lake? Possibly. I think a lot of that though comes down to if Meteor Lake's on time, actually. Like, I think if they buy up a bunch of Phoenix, it's because Phoenix is better than Raptor Lake and Raptor Lake Refresh, and maybe it's drop-in compatible with Strix, and they go, "We still got all this Intel stock to get rid of. Meteor Lake's not here. If we're gonna do a back-to-school laptop refresh, we wanna use Phoenix because it's just better." And for that reason, I think they go with that as well, not just because they have too much Alder Lake stock, sitting around. Alright, let me see here. Duh. Kenahoon25 writes in and says, "Hey, Tom, in the last die shrink, which patrons get access to, by the way, which is like a basically bonus broken silicon looking at really specific subjects. It's a video now. Only patrons get it. Support us on Patreon to get access." Anyways, Kenahoon says, Dan talked about how the 13900K should have been a 10 plus 8 design instead of an 8 plus 16. And it got me thinking. I remember you said that Arrow Lake was supposed to be 8 plus 32. Well, there was a design for it. I don't know if we should use the word supposed, but then was scrapped for the flagship being 8 plus 16 to use less energy and come out quicker. Do you think for Intel to stay competitive with AMD, they should increase their big core counts across the board? Um, well, so I want to be clear. I don't know that me and Dan thought they should have done anything that different with Raptor Lake. I think Raptor Lake going from 8 plus 8 with Alder Lake to 8 plus 16 with Raptor Lake was a logical, smart choice that allowed them to bring a decent upgrade over Alder Lake just 1 year later. I think 8 plus 16 was probably the right choice with Raptor Lake. But moving forward, I do think not even just gaming. I think there's an argument to be made that Intel may be having a little bit of tunnel vision here, going with 8 big cores and only little cores moving forward. That's what I hear they're doing, though. I don't hear anything different so far. I think that it would make a lot of sense to go with like 10 or 12 big cores plus 12 little cores instead of this 32 little core nonsense. I don't know. I just think there's a lot of apps that could benefit from a bit more than 8 cores and not just games. And then after that is when you tack on a bunch of little cores. I don't feel like 8 cores is enough just to be safe. I think it may have been smarter to go to 10 and then add little cores, but you know, that's just me. The thing is, I see no evidence that's what Intel's doing. It seems like it's 8 big cores for the foreseeable future. And I think by the time we get to like Panther Lake, the idea of big little Intel may have evolved to some new version of that where, you know, 8 plus 16 or 32 isn't the issue because they've like some kind of hybrid core with the Royal Core project from Jim Keller. So that's what I think. And Tasty Boonlockie writes, and it says, "Hi, Tom. Your 10P core conversation was interesting. It would have been hard for Intel to predict, though, I think, that 8 cores would be heralded as the optimal gaming CPU config. But in hindsight, I think they should have created an 8P core with the same die size as the i5 and undercut the 7700X. Intel's large L2 cache and improved L3 helps 13th gen compete with Zen 4 when referencing the i7. Unfortunately, though, E-cores are just benchmarking beasts, and they may only offer practical use cases for gamers running Discord or streaming software in the background. What product market fit were Intel hoping to create with an i5 when most creators that need high multi-threading would opt for an i7 or higher? Anyways, shouldn't the i5 have been designed to be the default choice for gamers, and therefore shouldn't the i5 have had more P cores and less E cores than it ended up having? I like this question. I think there's an honest argument that ideally the Alder Lake i5, the 12600K, should have had 8 big cores and no little cores. And then the i5 13600K should have had 8 big cores and 4 little cores. After all, wasn't that usually the point of previous gen i5s and i7s? The i5 gives you more than enough for gaming, like top of the end gaming, which you'd want 8 big cores for that, not 6. And then i5s traditionally gave you really good mixed thread performance. But if you wanted extra multi-threading, then you're supposed to get an i7. Yeah, I don't know. I think that ideally Alder Lake should have just given 8 big cores, no little cores to the i5, and 8 big cores and 6 and 4 little cores for the i7. Extra threads, not extra gaming. That was the point of the i7 in the past. And then the Raptor Lake situation should be 8 plus 4 for the i5 instead of 6 plus 8, and 8 plus 12 maybe even for the i7. But here's the thing. Don't forget that what Intel's doing with segmentation, half of that isn't arbitrary. Half of it is dictated by their yields. And although I hear that Intel's 10 nanometer is good now, which is what Raptor Lake uses, they still use an updated 10 nanometer node. Don't forget that I don't think it's yielding as well as TSMC. And if you think about it, the reason they're probably giving only 6 big cores to the i5 is half of their yields may need to have 2 of those cores disabled for higher clocking. Maybe they have 8 core yields that they could have used for the i5, but if they did that, some of those would have clocked way lower than is ideal, and so they had to be disabled. So I think that's why the i5 is 6 big cores. Half of it is they honestly thought 6 was enough for gaming, and then you want a lot for background tasks. But I do think the other half is they just have to sell the worst yields as i5s, guys. They have to. And because they have to, that means 6 big cores in the i5s, not 8. So, and until they get to a newer node, that's just still going to be an issue. And they don't get to a newer node until Meteor Lake. So, and even that might not come to desktop. So, yeah, that's holding that back. All right. I got a couple of tipped questions here. Before I answer them, let me just check something. Da, da, da. Over. Da, 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 da. Alrighty, so Toxin VX writes in and asks, do you see better driver and game support coming to Linux? I'm tired of games being broken by anti-cheat that would otherwise run perfectly. Yes, I think driver and game support will continue to improve on Linux because of the Steam Deck and because of Steam Deck competitors that will hopefully run the Steam OS. Even some Nux and mini PCs are running the Steam OS because it is more optimized for weaker hardware. Yep, should keep improving. I still think we're 5 years away from it maybe actually challenging Windows as a viable alternative. There's still plenty of people that game on Linux instead of Windows. I'm not saying you can't already, but until you'd have a situation where like 1 out of 3 mainstream gamers goes, maybe I just get Linux. I still think we're years away from that for sure. But I think it's only going to improve. I actually do think it's only going to improve. Okay, we got a console question here, which is fun. Let's see here. Let's see. Xbox. Okay. Let me put on a green hue for Xbox. Zach Miklos writes in and says, my question for you is if Starfield flops this September, could you see Microsoft clean house? It's been 3 years since the new Xbox, and they haven't had basically any AAA games come out besides Halo Infinite, and even that has bad online support. Zach, if Starfield flops, I think Bethesda's future is in question. And I don't think I wouldn't put money on it flopping, but I have heard worrying things about it, so I wouldn't put money on it being a roaring success. We're just gonna have to see. If Starfield flops, I don't know. I think there's gonna be a lot of questions. I do about what in Microsoft's doing with their studios, and Microsoft will start asking themselves, have we taken the right approach just buying every studio under the sun and hoping they make do with more money? Because it seems to me like that's not panning out. And if Starfield turns out great, then you'll go, finally, Microsoft is turning things around. If Starfield turns out bad, I don't know. I think there's a lot of questions that they need to start asking, about if their business model was the right choice. But we're not there yet. I'll just leave it at that. Would they clean house? From what I'm hearing, they're already practically cleaning house at 343 and gutting parts of Bethesda. So I think Starfield determines if Bethesda gets gutted, I don't know how much of the rest of the house gets cleaned, though. Microsoft needs Gear 6, not Starfield. Nilibja, does Microsoft really need another fucking Gears of War game? Or do they just need to start making new IP? That's my opinion, though. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the Sony Steam Deck competitor? Well, from what I've seen, it's not a Steam Deck competitor. The rumor out there right now for a new Vita is honestly, it sounds like something Sony could sell for $100. It has a cheap 1080p 60 screen, according to the rumor. It requires you to stream the game, so there's like very little processing power. That doesn't sound like a Steam Deck competitor to me. That sounds like Sony testing the waters on if PlayStation fans want a new handheld before they consider building a new handheld. But that's not a Steam Deck competitor, my friends. And I did ask around, by the way. People haven't heard about a true Vita successor at all. So the people I've asked, you know. Okay. I don't see any tipped questions. Let me double check if there's anything interesting in the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, which again, you get access to, ask free questions. QH Freddy writes in, do you think AMP or GDDR6X cards will have a shorter lifetime due to higher memory temps? They could, but I think it depends on the card. 3090 Ti's should be fine. I think 3070 Ti's will be fine. 3080s will probably be okay, depending on which model you buy. 3090s, there's a question of it, but did you abuse it? My 3090 worked fine. I don't know. The answer is a little bit of yes, but I think some of them will have zero issues, QH Freddy, long term compared to the other ones. Do. Alrighty. So I think I've gotten through all the things I meant to. I'm not seeing any new tipped questions. And so I think that's going to do it, everybody. I'm getting tired. I want to eat dinner. And I thank you guys for watching this live stream. Again, click on the link in the description. Buy Vans products if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead. Use the offer code Broken Silicon. Hit the like button. Share this. Double check that you're subscribed. While we were recording, I noticed we hit 157,000 YouTube subscribers. As far as I can tell, over half of you aren't subscribed. Everyone watching this, double check that you're subscribed. Ring the bell button. That helps me negotiate better and tell sponsors. If I have more subscribers, I can tell sponsors I'm not putting the ad early and it's going to only be this long. So this gives Moore's Law is Dead more power. This ensures that the videos you want to see actually pop up in your feed. And, if you support us on Patreon, you get ad-free, exclusive 1-hour-long videos with Die Shrink every other week. You get ad-free early drops of Broken Silicon, including video versions now. You get to ask questions for free, including with guests. I've got a lot of good guests coming on. Hardware Unbox is coming on. Adore TV is coming on. And Infinity War Dev is coming on. I've got AMD employees I'm hoping to get on soon. You can ask them all questions for free if you support us on Patreon. So join the Patreon, please. And Nate Modern Warfare 1 writes in, I haven't heard a lot about this GPU. What do you think about the 7900 XT Red Devil with an 8-pin at 789 versus the 7800 at almost 100, also 8 pins? I don't know what you mean. Red Devil 8 pins. Why does it matter if they have 8 pins? It's an AMD graphics card. This is the final question here. But he asked it, so I want to answer it. Let me see, people. At 980, 7900, Red Devil. The $980 one, did that already sell out? My friend, AMD graphics cards use 8 pins. So unless you're saying there is some graphics card I don't know about that has only one 8-pin, that's a 7900 XT, I think nothing of it. So, yeah, nothing. I think nothing of it. I think what this person's asking is, why is the 8-pin 4070 cheaper? Because it's one 8-pin, not two, and because that forces it to throttle, and it's also getting worse yields. That's not a factor for these AMD cards. So we'll leave it at that. All right, you tipped, so I wanted to make sure I answered your question. Thank you for watching. Double check that you're subscribed. Support our sponsors. Have a good evening, everybody.